He used my husband's name like it meant nothing. Signed it on papers I never saw. Signed mine too. In ink I never touched. And just like that, we were $500,000 in debt for a home I hadn't even heard of. Not for us. Not for our blood. For her family, her parents, their dream. I sat there, holding that phone to my ear, listening to the banker read me details I didn't understand, because how could I? I never agreed to anything. I felt my chest tighten, but I said nothing. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just nodded, thanked the voice on the line, and started planning. Thank you for watching and taking time to listen to what happened to me. It means more than I can say, so please tell me where you are watching from, because I believe there are others out there who understand this kind of pain. I wish I could tell you, this was the first time I felt disappointed by someone I brought into this world. But the truth is, it had been building for years. Small changes in his voice when I called, excuses about being busy, promises to visit that somehow melted into silence. When he married into that wealthy family, I told myself he was just trying to fit in. I never imagined he would trade loyalty for luxury, or that I would become nothing more than a signature to use when he wanted something expensive. I still cook my meals in an old pot my husband bought 30 years ago. I still sweep my own doorway. I live quietly, and I never ask for help. Yet somehow he decided that my life, my savings, and my name were his to borrow whenever he needed to impress those people. After that phone call, I sat in the darkness for hours, thinking about how my husband worked 2 jobs, just so our son could go to college. How we wore the same coats for years just so he would never feel poor or ashamed. And now he had the nerve to drag our names through the dirt so he could take smiling pictures in someone else's holiday house. When I first held him in my arms, I promised myself that I would never let the world be cruel to him. So I worked harder than most people believed I could, selling homemade bread on street corners, mending torn clothes for neighbors, taking every odd job so that he would never go hungry. I thought if I poured every ounce of love and sacrifice into him, he would grow up grateful and honorable. I did not realize I might be teaching him to take without asking. Over the years, I watched him reach success. I clapped for every promotion, sent prayers for every journey, and smiled even when I was left alone at home on holidays, so he could celebrate with his new family, who laughed at my simple life and called me traditional behind closed doors. I brushed it off because I believed a mother should be patient, even when she is forgotten. But that night after the bank call, I could not sleep. I kept staring at the framed wedding photograph on my shelf, remembering how proud he looked standing next to his bride. I recalled all the whispered doubts I swallowed back then. He had changed even before they said their vows, yet I kept believing I would always hold a place in his heart. Now here I was, with a loan hanging over my head, a forged signature tying me to a debt I did not create. While he served champagne on a balcony overlooking an ocean I had never even seen, I sat at my kitchen table tracing the edges of my teacup, and I slowly realized this was not just about money. It was about respect, heritage, and the name my husband had lived and died protecting. I whispered to myself that if he could turn our loyalty into a weapon against us, then I could turn my pain into power. I would not beg him. I would not argue. I would do something he never expected. I would fight for myself, even if it meant fighting against the person I once lived my life for. The next morning I woke up before the sun. Not because I wanted to, but because my heart would not let me rest. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, thinking about every moment that led me here. I remembered the years my husband and I spent saving coins in a dusty jar labeled dream. We never reached the dream because life kept giving us responsibilities. Hospital bills, school fees, broken roofs. But we never complained because we believed we were building something sacred. A life without debt and a son who would carry our name with pride. After he passed, I protected that dream with all I had. I refused to travel or spend unnecessarily, and instead stayed faithful to the quiet life we created, never imagining that the person I was safeguarding it for would be the very one to gamble it away. I cooked my breakfast slowly that morning, stirring my porridge with steady hands, though my mind was racing because I knew once I took the first step there would be no turning back. I opened the old wooden box where I kept important documents, my marriage certificate, my husband's death papers, my land deed, and I lined them carefully on the table. I called a small law firm, run by a woman a few years younger than my son, and asked if she could see me. She must have heard the fear in my voice because she told me to come immediately. I walked to that office on trembling feet, carrying a folder under my arm. And when she invited me in, I did not cry or shake. I laid everything out in front of her and told her I believed my signature had been forged by the son I raised. She looked at me with a sadness that only another woman could understand and promised to help me gather what we needed to prove every lie that had been told in my name. From that day, I met with her secretly. Sometimes in the evening, sometimes early in the morning, when no one would suspect I was planning anything. We contacted a handwriting analyst who studied my real signature against the forged one and confirmed it was false. Each time they found another piece of evidence against him. My heart broke a little more, but I never allowed myself to crumble because I kept hearing my husband's voice telling me to stand firm. We discovered that my son had altered documents not once but 3 different times, pulling my credit, dragging my late husband's history into a loan so he could buy a house with ocean views framed by glass windows, all while I sat at home, fixing a broken tap with my own hands because I did not want to spend money on a plumber. Every discovery was a dagger in my chest, yet it also sharpened my resolve because I saw clearly now. He no longer saw me as a person, but as a resource, something to use and discard. That realization changed me deeply. It woke something fierce inside me, something I did not know I still had. I told my lawyer that I wanted to take everything back, not as revenge, but as a reminder that even a quiet woman has limits. She agreed and promised to handle everything with precision, so that when we struck it would be clean, legal, and final. I walked back home that evening, and instead of being weighed down by sorrow, I felt a strange calmness wash over me. I knew I was stepping into a storm, but for the first time since that phone call, I felt like I was breathing again. I made myself a cup of tea, sat at my kitchen table, and instead of praying for my son to change, I prayed for strength to protect what was rightfully mine, and to carry my husband's legacy with the strength and dignity it deserved. When we finally gathered enough evidence, my heart was beating louder than it had in years. My lawyer submitted everything to the court quietly without warning him, and for a week I waited, watching the postbox like it held my future inside it. I kept going about my daily routine, cooking, sweeping, humming the old tunes my husband loved, all while knowing that any moment now, a legal storm would sweep across that pretty beachfront house he was so proud of. I did not feel joy or hatred. I felt a heavy sadness because this battle was not against a stranger. It was against the person who once held my hand and called me his guiding light. Still, I reminded myself that if I stayed silent one more time, he would think I had accepted his betrayal. So I stood firm and braced myself because I knew the reckoning was coming. The day the court injunction landed at that beachfront house, I imagined him stepping out onto the porch, confident and proud, only to be handed papers that stripped that pride away in seconds. I was not there to see it, but I pictured the look in his eyes, the confusion turning into fear, as he realized someone had discovered everything he tried to keep hidden under expensive furniture and sea breeze. I heard later from a neighbor of his in-laws that there was shouting, his wife pacing with her phone in hand, calling everyone she knew, her parents panicking because the deed was now frozen and they could no longer claim it as their luxury home. While all of this chaos erupted by the ocean, I sat in my small kitchen staring at the clock, listening to the ticking sound as if it was counting down towards a justice I had waited my whole life to witness. When my phone rang that afternoon and his number appeared, I did not answer. I let it ring out while I stirred my soup. He called again and again, left messages saying he just wanted to talk, promised it was not what I thought, begged me to pick up. But I stayed silent because I believed his panic was the first taste of accountability. Within days, my lawyer informed me that a full investigation was underway. The bank had now realized they had approved a fraudulent loan. The handwriting analyst had submitted a report stating the signature was forged, and the judge had agreed to freeze all transactions connected to the property until the case was heard. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Not out of relief, but because I was finally stepping onto a path of justice that I never thought I would walk at this age. Friends who had not called me in years suddenly started reaching out, saying they had heard rumors that I had taken my son to court. Some were shocked, others whispered that I was brave. I ignored the noise because I had spent a lifetime being gentle and understanding. This time I wanted to be firm and unstoppable. I spent many evenings sitting alone thinking about how far I had come, how the pain of betrayal had carved strength into my bones. I never imagined I would need to fight my own flesh and blood. But life has a strange way of revealing who we truly are when tested. I told myself that if he wanted to play with my name, then I would teach him the value of a name. Not with screams or threats, but with laws, signatures, and consequences that could not be erased. I fell asleep that night, clutching my husband's photograph, whispering that I was doing this for both of us, so that our story would not end with deceit, but with dignity. Weeks passed, and the case grew louder. Lawyers spoke, bankers questioned him, and every secret he thought he had buried was now being laid out in documents that carried my handwriting beside a stranger's imitation of it. I heard nothing from him after those first desperate calls, but I knew he was scrambling because his wife's family had started blaming him for dragging them into a scandal that made their name tremble. I stayed in my routine, watering my garden, knitting quietly and pretending everything was normal, while inside me there was a storm of memories reminding me of birthdays I planned, school uniforms I stitched, and lullabies I sang just to give him a good life. That storm made me stronger each time I thought I could not bear the weight of this fight. I whispered to myself that I had already lost the son I once knew, so I would not lose my pride too. Victory had become my only form of peace. When the court date finally arrived, I dressed in my best outfit, one I had saved for weddings and funerals, because I believed this day carried the spirit of both celebration and mourning. I walked into that courtroom with steady steps, clutching my handbag as though it held every sacrifice I had ever made. I did not look at them as I passed because I knew if he did, it might necessitate, and I could not afford that. He sat down beside my lawyer, while he sat across the room surrounded by the very people he had once tried so hard to impress, but none of them looked proud now. His wife kept her head down. Her parents whispered among themselves, and he stared straight ahead with a face I hardly recognized as my own kin. The judges spoke calmly, reading out the charges, explaining that the signatures were forged, that a loan had been taken without consent, and that the property in question was now under investigation. Every sentence felt like a stun being placed on his shoulders. I listened in silence, remembering how I once held his hand as she learned to walk, how I cheered him on when he won his first race at school, and how I swore I would stand by him through anything. But life sometimes turns love into a test. I never thought I would need to prove my strength against him. After testimonies were given and documents examined, the judge ruled in my favor, voiding the loan, removing my husband's name from debt, and ordering the beachfront property to be seized and auctioned to repay all fraudulent costs. I did not smile. I simply closed my eyes and let out a breath I had been holding since that first phone call outside the courthouse. He tried to approach me, his voice shaking, as she said he was sorry, and that he did not mean for things to go this far. I looked at him for a long moment, seeing the little boy he used to be behind the man he had become. I told him softly that forgiveness was not the same as forgetting, and that he would need to live with the consequences of the choices she made, while trying to uplift people who never truly cared for him. Then it turned and walked away with tears in my eyes, because even though I had won the case, I understood that sometimes victory does not all the deepest wounds, it simply keeps them from destroying everything else you hold dear. I returned home that evening feeling lighter yet strangely hollow, as though my heart had been both freed and emptied at the same time. I brewed myself a fresh cup of tea and sat by the window, listening to the distant sounds of life going on as normal, while my own world felt forever changed. I thought about my husband and how proud he would have been to see that even in his absence, I protected our name with the same ferocity once protected our home. I traced my fingers along the edge of our wedding photo, knowing that this victory was not truly about money or property, but about safeguarding the values webbed built together brick by brick over decades. Later that week, news of the cases spread across our town. Strangers who once looked through began nodding in quiet respect. Some even stopped me in the street to say I was strong for standing up for myself, but they didn't know the full cost of that strength. They did not know how many nights I cried silently into my pillow, wishing things had been different, wishing my son had chosen to honor, instead of abandoning, use in pursuit of approval from people who only valued status. I spent my days trying to return to normal, sweeping my kitchen floor, baking bread, and tending to my small garden, yet everything around me seemed to carry new meaning. The flowers looked brighter, the sky felt wider. I realized I was not just reclaiming my dignity, I was rediscovering myself slowly. I allowed peace to return piece by piece. I stopped waiting for his calls, stopped hoping for apologies that could help the past, and instead focused on celebrating each gentle moment. I still had, because life, even after betrayal, can grow beautiful again if you water it with courage and let it to bloom in its own time. With each new sunrise, I felt my strength knitting itself back together. I stopped checking my phone for his messages. I stopped flinching whenever someone mentioned his name. Instead, I filled my mornings with calm routine. I would knead dough slowly the way my grandmother taught me, letting their rhythm steady my thoughts. I would sit in my porch with a blanket over my knees, watching the world wake while sipping tea that tasted a little sweeter now. I no longer carried the bitterness of silence. Even began writing letters to myself, a habit I never practiced before. I poured my thoughts onto paper, thanking myself for choosing dignity over despair, acknowledging the sorrow while celebrating the survival. I reminded myself that I had walked through the fire and come out with graces still intact. I decided to use a portion of the money returned from the auction to repair my old roof and repaint the faded walls of my home. Not because I wanted luxury, but because I deserved to live in a place that reflected the resilience of my spirit. Neighbors noticed the changes and smiled when they passed my gate, saying I felt like my home was shining again. On Sundays, I started inviting a few old friends over for tea and conversation. We would laugh about the past and dream softly about the future. I realized in those moments that life was gently giving me back what betrayal tried to steal: my joy, my faith in goodness, and my belief that even when someone you love hurts you, the heart can still stretch toward new beginnings without breaking. I promised myself that I would no longer shrink myself for anyone, and that I would carry the lesson of this pain with me, not as a burden but as a lantern, guiding me toward peace. One afternoon, while I was dusting the photo frames in my hallway, I paused in front of one particular picture. It was taken years ago during a summer picnic, back when he still looked at me with warmth in his eyes, and I could not help wondering where that childlike devotion had gone. I ran my fingers over the glass, remembering the sound of his laughter, the way he used to rush home just to tell me every detail of his day. Those memories did not make me regret what I had done, but they reminded me that love, no matter how deep, cannot protect you from disappointment if the person you love forgets what loyalty means. I spent the rest of the day thinking about how often women like me stay silent, believing that keeping peace is the same as keeping love, yet silences sometimes allows wounds to grow so deep that by the time we speak up, everything is already broken. I promised myself that I would never again allow forgiveness to become a disguise for self-neglect. I put the photograph back on the shelf and stepped outside into the sunlight, breathing deeply as though I was inhaling hope itself. My garden was blooming with colors I had not noticed before. Roses opening their petals, just as I was opening my heart to whatever new chapter waited ahead. I whispered to myself that I still had time to foy, that life was not done teaching me things, and that perhaps this painful journey was meant to remind me of my own worth. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders and smiled, because despite everything I had lost, I felt more alive, more grounded, and more unafraid than I ever had before. Not long after that, as life began to feel softer again, I received an envelope without a return address, and when I opened it, I found Ale Titor written in his familiar handwriting. He apologized not just for taking the loan, but for forgetting who taught them. The difference between right and wrong is that he had lost himself trying to earn approval from people who only cared about appearances, and that he now realized the price he paid was far greater than losing a house. He had lost my trust, something money could never buy. One day I might let them sit with me again, not as a successful man, but as the son I raised. I read the letter several times, my eyes filling with tears, not because I believed every word, but because the part of me that once held him as a baby still wished he had never strayed so far from the values I poured into him. I did not rush to respond. I placed the letter in a drawer next to my most precious memories and told myself that healing takes time, even when forgiveness is offered. Sometimes forgiveness does not mean opening the door again, it means letting go of the anger so it no longer burns inside your heart. I spent that evening watching the sunset, the sky painted with golden and pink hues, and I spoke softly to the wind as though it could carry my thought. If he truly wants to come back, he will have to walk the long road of redemption with humility and patience, because I will no longer shrink myself just to make somebody else feel comfortable. I poured myself a cup of tea, wrapped my hands around it, and whispered that even after betrayal, there is still beauty to be found in choosing peace over bitterness. Since that day, I have continued living quietly, choosing peace over pride and wisdom over woundedness. Each morning when I wake, I remind myself that I've already faced one of the hardest truths a mother can swallow, and I survived. I have learned that sometimes strength is not found in loud battles but insolent resilience, and that reclaiming your name is one of the bravest acts of love you can offer to yourself. Now I spend my time nurturing the parts of me that once felt forgotten, planting hope where pain once lived, and trusting that whatever is meant for me'll not require me to lose myself again. If he truly wishes to be part of my life again, he will come not with excuses but with respect, because that is the only bridge I am willing to rebuild. Thank you for staying with me through my story. Your presence means more than you know. Please subscribe so you do not miss the next truth. Share.